Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning. Thanks so much for being here. For those that I haven't met, my name is Mukesh Jain, and I serve as the Dean of Medicine and Biological Sciences at Brown University. And it is a real pleasure to welcome you to this year's Ruth Sauber Distinguished Medical Alumni Lectureship. So today's gathering, I think in many ways, is just a wonderful reflection of what makes this community special. We're bringing together, and as I look around the room, we have alums, students, family, faculty, and friends all here during commencement weekend to celebrate achievement, connection, enduring bonds. I was just speaking to Jason Schlossberg, who you'll hear from momentarily, connecting again with colleagues after many, many years. And those enduring bonds are really, really special, particularly in the Brown medical community. This lectureship also gives us a chance to honor the remarkable legacy of Ruth Sauber. As many of you know, she served as Medical Student Affairs Officer from 1972 until her retirement in 1994 and became affectionately known as Medical School Mom. Her warmth, guidance, deep commitment to students has left a lasting impression on so many physicians that have passed through the halls of this institution over the last 50 years. We are deeply grateful to the Sauber family for establishing and continuing this lectureship in her honor. And I'm going to embarrass the Sauber family, but just ask them to wave. I won't ask you to stand, but just wave and be recognized. And this year is really quite meaningful for the family because they're here to celebrate another important milestone, the graduation of Ruth Sauber's granddaughter, Dick and Pam's daughter, Elyse Sauber from the Warren Alpert Medical School before she begins her OBGYN residency at Georgetown. Elyse is not here. Oh, there she is. Oh, right on cue, right on cue. There's a lot of, that is really a grand entrance. That was great. So Elyse will be starting, if you missed it, her OBGYN residency at Georgetown, which is wonderful. But what I would say is I can only imagine how proud Ruth would be to see her legacy carried forward in such a personal and inspiring way. We're also delighted to welcome back one of our distinguished alums, Dr. Amit Joshi, whose career has exemplified excellence in surgical education, mentorship, and innovation in medical training. And at this time, real pleasure to introduce Dr. Jason Schlossberg to the podium to introduce Dr. Joshi as this year's Ruth B. Sauber Distinguished Medical Alumni Lecturer.
Thank you, Dean Jain, and good morning, distinguished colleagues. My name is Dr. Jason Schlossberg. I'm a graduate of Brown Medical School class of 2001 and a former classmate of Dr. Amit Joshi's. I have known Dr. Joshi for nearly 30 years now, and I consider him one of my closest and dearest friends. It is a great honor to have been asked to introduce Amit, as one rarely gets the opportunity to describe their admiration, respect, and love for someone in such a public forum. In preparation for this introduction, I asked Amit to send me his CV. And I received back an impressive 27 pages, single-spaced of extraordinary accomplishments. I will do my best to summarize an undoubtedly exceptional career. Dr. Joshi is the Associate Dean for Graduate Medical Education at Cooper Medical School, where he also serves as Professor of Surgery. Nationally, he is best known as the Editor-in-Chief of SCORE, the American Board of Surgery's National Curriculum for Surgical Education, and is the former president of the Association of Program Directors in Surgery. A graduate of Brown University's PLME program, Dr. Joshi is what I consider a true Renaissance man. He is not only an accomplished educator, researcher, and clinician, but he is also a phenomenal pianist. He earned his BA in music and his MD with academic distinction before completing surgical residency at Cornell and fellowship training in minimally invasive surgery at North Shore, Long Island Jewish. Dr. Joshi has held numerous national leadership roles, including on the board of directors of the American Board of Surgery, the board of governors of the American College of Surgeons, and was recognized with the ACGME's Palmer Award for Program Director Excellence. In 2025, he received 2 of surgery's highest educational honors: induction into the Academy of Master Surgeon Educators of the ACS, and an honorary fellowship from the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. Now, while I could go on for another 26 additional pages of impressive accolades, I don't believe what makes Amit truly special can be found in his CV. As I pondered how to quantify what I love most about Amit, I could hear him saying his favorite line in my head: "Sloshy, what's your source?" So I decided to reach out to classmates and family members who know him best and ask them to describe Dr. Joshi in 3 words or less. Dr. Anish Sheth described him as meticulous, passionate, principled. Dr. Ari Blitz, and I love this one, debonair, discerning, and above reproach. Dr. Shilpa Pai, warm, kind, and encouraging. And his wife Nikki and daughter Layla use words like principled, decisive, and adaptable. For me, Dr. Joshi has an unwavering passion for life, purpose, and people. He is the caring doctor who slept on the dirt floor of his 50-patient tent in Bhuj, India, so that he would be closer to his patients in case they had a medical emergency. He is the guy who befriends children of tea farmers in Munnar, India, and spontaneously starts Bhangra dancing with them on the hiking trail. He is the loyal friend who stayed by my side at 4 a.m. in a hospital in Scotland when I was struck with food poisoning and still managed to make me laugh. He is the person who lights up any room he steps into with this infectious smile, and he encourages us all to be the best version of ourselves. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Amit Joshi.
I would use that. Well, thank you, Jason, for a wonderful introduction. I'd especially like to recognize the Sauber family. These endowed lectureships are wonderful opportunities for people to get together, to reconnect, and I think establish an enduring legacy within medicine, within surgery, particularly within medical education hosted here. So we're all very grateful that your efforts have really allowed us to be here. It's been a long time since this picture. My classmates in this room will recognize this. 33 years have passed since 1993. Yep, pick yourselves out there. It's amazing, but so much of our professional life, friendships, and even identity as a physician can be traced back to this place, even if it's not physically here, up on the hill, and to the so many people in the room who shaped me to get here. I'll pause for a second just to talk about the importance of the PLME. I mean, the PLME is why I'm here. It remains remarkably relevant in this world because it recognizes the principle that physicians are not formed through science alone. I think we will all understand that medicine requires intellectual breadth, ethical reasoning, communication, empathy, and an understanding of the human condition, qualities that are cultivated through deep engagement with the humanities and the liberal arts. And for many of us, the PLME did just that. It prepared us more than just for medical school. It shaped the way we think, teach, communicate, and care for patients. So I have to start with some gratitude. I was digging through my folder the other day. So I pulled out my acceptance letter from Brown, and there at the very bottom is a signature from Dean Ip. She was among the very first people, probably for all of us, who welcomed us into the PLME and to Brown, and was really a constant presence through my journey here, showing extraordinary patience and kindness with a student who might have taken the humanities part of his pre-medical education a little bit too seriously, and the science a little bit too unseriously. But I do argue that that's precisely the gift that Brown, the PLME, Dean Ip, you gave me the freedom to explore broadly, think deeply, and develop intellectually beyond the conventional boundaries of just science. To David Josephson, who's here in the fourth row, truly the architect of my undergraduate education. I owe an enormous debt of gratitude to him. And although his core discipline is musicology, his influence in me extends far beyond music itself. And he truly provided a world-class education in the humanities, letters, writing, critical thought, intellectual rigor. And he fundamentally shaped the way I learned to analyze ideas, communicate, and engage with scholarship. Dr. Ayala is somewhere here in the room. I spent some time with him earlier. My mentor, my PhD mentor in the lab. We spent a lot of time doing things to mice and to cells, but he introduced me to both the skill and humanity required for bench investigation. Dr. Ayala is someone who has been continuously funded by the NIH for the 25 years I've known him, and certainly far beyond that, and is really just an amazing example of persistence, discipline, resilience that's required to contribute meaningfully to scientific discovery. And he was an extraordinary mentor to me. Two clinical mentors. I know Colin Harrington is here in the room. Just amazing mentors to me. Mark Fagan on the left, our internal medicine clerkship director at Rhode Island Hospital, opened our eyes to the elegance and impact of patient care while simultaneously demonstrating the immense importance of pedagogy in medicine. And Dr. Colin Harrington, a neuropsychiatrist, just guided us through a fascinating, there's Dr. Harrington right there, a fascinating experience in neuropsychiatry. I still remember your vivid insistence on careful clinical reasoning, physical diagnosis, and thoughtful observation, but also always balanced with empathy, compassion for vulnerable patients, really at the bottom of their lives, and just an amazing impact on us. And then David Harrington. David is a surgeon here at Brown, has been here for a long time. My first memory of surgery was when he allowed me to place a 3-0 Lambert stitch in small bowel, and that's what hooked me on general surgery. Exciting to me, maybe not to all of you. Later wrote my letters of recommendation. We have gotten into a lot of academic mischief together over the years. He preceded me as the president of the APDS, and we've really done a lot of good work together to try to improve surgical education. And to all these people, I think they are testaments to the fact that there's nobility in the patient care that physicians render, but it's through education and research that one's life can really live on in others. All right, so here's my talk. We're going to talk about graduate medical education. That's what I've spent most of my career exploring and trying to improve. We're going to talk a little bit about history, so the establishment of standards and structure, the introduction of competency-based education. The reason I picked that topic is it really parallels our careers as physicians. It started when we were medical students up in the Purple Palace, and we're 25 years into that process. And then I want to close with a little bit of excitement about the future and what competency-based assessment, individualized assessment, and precision training can really hope to promise for us in the future. So we approach this subject with hubris if we think we invented surgical or medical education. Of course, it dates back many, many millennia from Egypt to Greece and many, many centuries before. But certainly through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, medicine became increasingly formalized through institutions in Paris, Bologna, Edinburgh, London, and eventually organized into faculties and royal academies across Europe. By the early 1800s, training began to shift from apprenticeship models to organized clinical education. The British system still emphasized apprenticeship, while the Paris school pioneered bedside teaching, clinical pathologic correlation. The German universities introduced formal hierarchies, including structured assistant physician roles. And at the same time, of course, medicine was starting to transform scientifically. Ether anesthesia in 1846, Lister's antisepsis in 1867 dramatically improved outcomes, not just in surgery, but in medicine writ large. And by the late 1800s and early 1900s, certainly more formalization and academics were starting to infuse into training. In the United Kingdom, the MRCS and FRCS exams really standardized qualifications. You had to actually pass an exam to practice as a physician or a surgeon. And then in mainline Europe, France, Germany, Austria established structured hospital pathways, graded responsibilities, scientific rigor, and research under leaders like Bill Roth and Coker. What brought this kind of structure to the US, of course, was William Osler. He established the first modern academic teaching hospital at Hopkins, integrating bedside teaching with scientific medicine. And then Halstead, also at Hopkins, imported the German surgical training model, creating the first true American residency system with progressive responsibilities. But it was Churchill at Mass General who instituted the recognizable system we understand now, which is the rectangular system. So instead of a pyramidal system that Osler had, the rectangular system that Churchill introduced at Mass General. But also, importantly, it was a group of masters as opposed to one single master that everyone had to work under. And yes, those words were used back then. However, despite these pockets of excellence, even in the first decades of the 1900s, American medical education broadly remained extraordinarily inconsistent. Many medical schools were proprietary institutions with minimal admission requirements, inadequate laboratories, and little clinical training. So recognizing the need for an independent national assessment, the AMA and the Carnegie Foundation commissioned Abraham Flexner, you'll all recognize that name, to survey every medical school in the US and Canada. So his 1910 report provided a devastating critique of the existing system and called for rigorous admission standards, university affiliation, laboratory science, and structured clinical education in teaching hospitals. And this report actually lives on to have become the intellectual blueprint for 20th century American medical education. And interestingly, it accelerated the closure of poorly performing schools and finally and firmly linked physician training to universities, research, and hospital-based clinical care. As Jason mentioned, I've done a lot of work with the American College of Surgeons. Probably the most enduring thing the college ever did when it was founded, shortly after it was founded in 1913, was establish the Hospital Standardization Program. This was founded in 1917 and established some of the first expectations for hospital quality, surgical training, medical records, and organized clinical oversight. In 1952, the American College would join then with the AHA, the American Hospital Association, the American Medical Association, the American College of Physicians, and the Canadian Medical Education Association to create the Joint Commission, which we will all recognize still accredits hospitals to this day. During the early 20th century, medicine also began to become more increasingly specialized. New certifying boards began to define expertise within individual disciplines. You'll all recognize your relevant board in this slide. And certification increasingly required not simply apprenticeship or hospital service, but completion of defined residency experiences, also operative exposure and formal examinations. And as more specialties developed their own boards, pressure grew for greater standardization of residency training across institutions to lead up to this board certification. And the recognition was that hospitals and universities could no longer be allowed to just train residents entirely according to local custom. So instead, curricula, duration of training, supervision, case experience, and educational expectations became linked to being able to sit for specialty board certification. By the 1970s, GME had become far more complex than the traditional apprenticeship model. We talked about multiple specialty pathways, Medicare funding with 1965 establishment created major federal investment in residency education, and teaching hospitals began to rapidly expand across the country. At the same time, there was an outcry for public accountability regarding physician training and patient safety, along with the growing concern that oversight of residency education had become fragmented across numerous organizations and specialties. So the ACGME was created in 1981 by these organizations that you can see there. And the point was that its residency review committees were composed of experts from individual disciplines who developed specialty-specific requirements, reviewed programs, recommended accreditation actions, and monitored compliance. And so this finally allowed national consistency while preserving specialty autonomy. So early accreditation focused primarily on program characteristics such as case volume, curricular structure, institutional resources. The paradigm began to shift dramatically, and this starts to coincide with our careers as physicians of the class, of our reunion class, the ACGME's outcome project between 1999 and 2002, which outlined the 6 core competencies and formally redirected GME towards measurable educational outcomes. And actually, I promise I did not pre-plant these 2 posters at the back of the room, but they list the 6 competencies. I don't know if you all will remember, in my classmates, Dick Dawes, one of our deans of our first phase 1 curriculum, came in, and I still remember when he announced the 6 competencies. And of course, I didn't think anything of it at the time, but I still do remember his doing that while we were sitting in the Purple Palace. So then what happened? This was simply the introduction of competencies required us not simply to ask whether programs had the right structure, but whether residents were truly developing the needs they required for independent practice. Meanwhile, the Institute of Medicine in 1999 published two seminal works. To Err is Human argue that poorly designed healthcare systems and processes were resulting in up to 100,000 deaths annually in U.S. hospitals. And Crossing the Quality Chasm introduced the 6 aims for healthcare quality, that it should be safe, effective, patient-centered, timely, efficient, and equitable. So in response, in 2003, 19 years after the Libby Zion case, 14 years after the resulting Bell Commission's duty hour regulations in New York State, the ACGME implemented national duty hour standards. Key changes, as we all know, 80-hour weekly work limit, 1 day off in 7, restrictions on on-call frequency, and mandatory time off between shifts. And this was one of the largest interventions to date of ACGME oversight into the daily resident conditions of work. These expanded in 2011. New standards strengthened attending oversight, further limited intern shifts to 16 hours, and emphasized transitions of care, the importance of teamwork, and a culture of safety. At the same time, they launched this product called the Clinical Learning Environment Review, which started to delve into the quality improvement systems, the systems of safety and professionalism in the entire hospital, not just within the GME structure. And so anyone who's been in GME recognizes clear visits that went on for about 15 or 20 years. The next accreditation system was a seminal move also, launched in 2012. And this finally moved us from episodic reviews, so an every 5 or 7 or 10-year review, to continuous quality improvement and accreditation within GME. In the meantime, specialty-specific milestones were developed for frameworks for individual resident progression over time. Clinical competency committees, program evaluation committees became integrated into the structures of residency oversight and started to draw on data, both formative and summative data, to provide decisions about how residents were progressing within training. In 2014, the ACGME and the American Osteopathic Association launched the single accreditation system. It's hard to believe, but before 2014, we had 2 totally separate accreditation systems. And so finally, in 2014, these coalesced into one accreditation framework, finally consolidating all of national GME with common standards and oversight. And now, up to the 2020s, they have started to focus on other parts of graduate medical education. Burnout, psychological safety, diversity, workforce sustainability have become central discussions in accreditation discussions. At the same time, I briefly mentioned that the ACGME has increasingly leveraged large-scale data streams from surveys, milestones, board outcomes, institutional metrics to support more continuous and responsive oversight. So let's think about the ACGME. Without doubt, one of the major successes of modern accreditation has been standardization. If you compare us to even a century ago, certainly millennia ago, we now have a very, very standardized, predictable framework for accreditation. And for sure, over time, residency training has evolved from highly variable local apprenticeships into a far more consistent national system. Programs are now expected to meet common standards related to educational processes, curriculum development, clinical case exposure. The goal was not to make every program identical, but to share and establish a baseline of quality and accountability so that trainees across the country would receive a consistent educational experience and patients could have greater confidence in the training of their physicians. But despite the many advances, there are still important limitations in our current accreditation system. And one, and probably the most important, is the relative paucity of high-quality outcomes data used to actually drive standards. Yes, I told you the ACGME collects enormous amounts of information, surveys, case logs, milestones, board pass rates, site visits, but historically the standards that are still used to govern the accreditation still rely on consensus, process measures, rather than robust evidence directly linking standards to patient or educational outcomes. A second challenge is that many of these quality measures are administered by the accreditor itself. So resident and faculty surveys, for example, come from the ACGME. They don't come from an independent source. And so they are inherently limited because respondents know that the accrediting body is both the collector of the data and also the judge of the program. So this leads to inherent response bias, institutional coaching, inflation towards perceived safe answers. You can see this data here. This is from our recent Cooper data for 500 residents, 50 programs. And the national mean is upwards of 4.8, 4.9. Our institutional mean is 4.8, 4.9. Inherently flawed when you look at that data, that no mean should be up at 4.8 or 4.9 out of 5. And it's again because of that inherent bias that the accreditor is also the judger of programs. So we've been aware of this data scarcity for some time, and using our own experience in surgery, I'll relate a little bit of how we tried to bend the curve on that. So I'm going to take you back to 2001. Duty hours had just started to come around. Surgical residents were, at that time, still before the national duty hour standards, still working upwards of 100 hours a week, accumulating about 25,000 hours of in-hospital experience over 5 years of training. Transitioning to the 80-hour work week decreased that clinical exposure by about 6 to 12 months over a 5-year residency. So a significant cut in in-hospital training. Importantly, that reduction didn't happen during weekday elective OR cases, but during nights and weekends when arguably there was the most urgent emergent pathology and the most autonomy, or you might say lack of supervision, at least lack of direct supervision overnight. Simultaneously, physician trainees, and this curve has only continued to accelerate over time, trainees are expected to master a rapidly expanding fund of knowledge. In surgery, for example, this includes biomedical knowledge, evolving technologies such as minimally invasive surgery, robotics, advanced imaging, genomics, recovery pathways, AI-assisted diagnostics, and increasingly sophisticated perioperative care systems. So it's a disconnect, a 20% reduction in in-hospital time and an exponential increase in the amount of expectations for trainees. So we might have predicted that around 2005, general surgery residents began to fail their oral board exams, which are designed to test judgment at alarming rates. Our field was certainly in flux. Graduating medical students started to vote with their feet, and fewer students expressed an interest in pursuing general surgery. In 2001, our matching year, I was the beneficiary of a 20% unmatch rate. So that worked out great for me, but not so great for our field. And so this was a call to action. The field clearly thought that they were at the edge of the cliff, and so convened what was then the Blue Ribbon Commission. I'm going to cut to the chase and say this was the first of 2 Blue Ribbon commissions. But this was an in-depth analysis of why the field was falling off the cliff. So they wanted to look at workforce, undergraduate surgical education, duty hours, and residency education structure and support. The most enduring result, they looked at lots of things, but by far the most enduring result was the formation of SCORE. So the Surgical Council on Resident Education came out of the first Blue Ribbon Commission. I should mention that 7 organizations came together to form SCORE. Any of you who've ever been in an operating room lounge know that to get 7 surgeons to agree on one thing is pretty hard. So to get 7 organizations to come together, not just with a shared concept, but also funding, was really looking back at an incredible accomplishment. And then over the next several years, they devised that curriculum, deployed it on a web-based platform. So this is what SCORE looks like today. We now have 7 content ecosystems. You can see the start dates. The earliest is general surgery in 2008. We just started endocrine surgery last year, 2 years ago, I should say. All of these curricula have modules with them, multiple choice questions. And general surgery alone now has 460 modules, 1,600 multiple choice questions, and you can see all the other specialties here: pediatrics, vascular, surgical oncology, critical care, and oral maxillofacial surgery and endocrine. This represents thousands and thousands of hours, but also thousands of structured educational assets developed collaboratively by national surgical educators. And it reflects an important shift in surgical education from locally created teaching materials to scalable, standardized, continuously updated national curricula that can be deployed across institutions and even internationally.
Is this to help study for your boards? Is that what this is?
Good question. We're going to get to that. So the growth of SCORE over the past 2 decades has been substantial. What began in 2008 with just 33 subscribing programs has expanded to more than 200 within a few years. And by 2019, had 300 programs, and 95% of surgical training programs were subscribing. Our current numbers are over 700 programs, and we have programs throughout the United States as well as internationally. Importantly, SCORE is no longer limited just to US ACGME accredited residencies. It now includes international programs and medical student clerkships, and services over 13,000 trainees across the world. To answer your question, this is how the SCORE curriculum is organized now: multiple surgical disciplines and training levels. Within each specialty, you can see there are common topics, represent material that every training should master routinely, uncommon topics, less frequently encountered, but still important. And then additional topics designed for fellowship training, but all designed to capture the complexity and specialization of modern surgical education. And all built not just to study for your boards, but also to take care of patients as a bedside educational tool. So together, this created a layered curriculum that is standardized nationally, but also adaptable to different specialties, training stages, and competency-based educational frameworks. So this is what a module looked like in 2013, really just a PDF, some learning objectives. You should know this and you should know that. If you want to learn more about it, go to these textbooks. And this is what a module looks like now, optimized for a phone. This is going to be a module on gallstones. And so you click into it and you're going to see some templated learning objectives, all bulleted content. So it's intentionally not prose, but bulleted content because we have learned trainees really like to absorb material that way. Lots of images, diagrams, charts. And the key about this is, A, it's portable. You take it wherever you need to go. But more importantly, it can be updated and edited on the fly. So every now and then we'll identify an error or a typo, less frequently a breaking news in surgical management, and we can literally update it overnight. Multiple choice questions. I told you there are thousands of them scattered throughout the curriculum. This is still the way that most surgical trainees access SCORE. And we have thousands of education questions in here. And that allows trainees to identify knowledge gaps, reinforce retention, and prepare for high-stakes examinations through repeated self-assessment. And each multiple choice question is discretely linked to a module within SCORE. We have hundreds of images. We have a really neat project with Emory University. They have an illustration lab. Actually, the way I found them was through Valerie Weiss, our classmate. I think Shilpa gave me her information and I called her. She's a medical illustrator. After medical school, she got a master's degree in medical illustration. And she hooked me up with these people at Emory, and they've created now hundreds of images for us designed by surgeons for surgeons. We also have some videos. This is a trigger warning. If you don't want to see blood, close your eyes. I'll warn you here. There's not a lot of blood, but there's a little bit. This is an actually lymph node dissection. This comes out of the University of South Alabama. So we commission videos to be made of the most common operations that we do. They are really tightly edited. They are shot in 4K video. Again, designed by surgeons for surgeons, and so much better than going to YouTube where you really don't understand exactly the validity or the quality of what you're seeing. And they have landmarks. They're all narrated. I've muted the narration. And most importantly, they're standardized for really high yield and common procedures so that every trainee and probably faculty can use this. So one of SCORE's founding goals was to provide equitable access to high quality educational resources across the continuum of training, regardless of geography or program structure. So think about the heterogeneity of a really small, under-resourced, perhaps rural program and a landmark flagship tertiary quaternary hospital with all the resources under the sun. The heterogeneity there would have been great. So we compared that. We've looked at SCORE utilization patterns across different types of programs and geography, and we've now found consistently remarkable patterns of use across those programs. So these findings suggest that trainings across the paradigm and the landscape engage with educational content in highly similar ways, and we've really bent the curve in leveling the playing field for surgical trainee access to education. As surgical education evolves, so of course must the curriculum. So yes, of course we update things every day, but we've really started to expand beyond traditional operative knowledge into domains that reflect the realities of modern surgical practice and global healthcare delivery. So we've instituted a curriculum for military readiness, for example. These are for trainees who enter our programs and need to deploy July 1 after their chief residency and are on a forward operating base. There are modules in there like how to deal with unexploded ordnance, how to deal with devastating blast injury, things that civilian surgeons probably don't see very often, but we need these surgeons to be ready to go on day one to take care of our service members and civilians that they might take care of across the world. We've also included informatics and digital literacy, palliative and end-of-life care, and delivery of surgery in resource-limited environments. We're placing greater emphasis on international surgery and globally relevant educational content, recognizing that surgical training can no longer be viewed solely through a single national lens. And the idea here is that we can prepare surgeons not just for today's operating rooms, but for increasingly complex, technologically driven, globally interconnected systems of care. So I told you about the devastating the board pass rate in the early 2000s. So that curve has changed. So since that early 2000s dip, examination outcomes have now steadily improved. Qualifying examinations, which test broad medical knowledge in particular, have risen dramatically and now approach historic highs. So although, of course, many factors have likely contributed to this, including curricular standardization, increased assessment infrastructure, and greater attention to competency-based training, the overall trajectory suggests that surgical education has adapted successfully to those dark days, from those dark days in the early 2000s. Despite the growth of competency-based education and national accreditation standards, there's still surprisingly few products like SCORE. In fact, there are probably only 3, and these come from the otolaryngologists, the urologists, and the orthopedic surgeons. The relative scarcity of this really reflects how difficult these efforts are to build and maintain. And to give you a sense, I talked about specialty consensus, how hard that is to build, to get 7 organizations to come together. The financial support is not trivial. It probably took about $10 million to establish SCORE over the first decade. Since then, we've been self-sustaining as a nonprofit arm of the American Board of Surgery. But they also represent an important evolution in medical education. Again, moving from isolated local teaching towards coordinated national learning systems. I got this slide 2 weeks ago at the International Surgical Society meeting, and it's a stark couple of slides here. And it really reflects the reality of global surgery and surgical education. So I think we all know Africa is home to a population that now exceeds 1.4 billion people, with a population that is still rapidly growing and disproportionately young. Yet the surgical workforce available to care for that population remains profoundly limited, just a sliver compared to the rest of the world. In many regions of sub-Saharan Africa, the density of surgeons per capita remains only a small fraction of that seen in the continent of North America or Europe by a 60-fold difference. This consequence is not merely reduced elective surgery, but limited access to trauma surgery, cancer surgery, obstetric care, pediatric surgery, and emergency surgical services that all directly influence mortality and life expectancy. And this all results from limitations in training capacity, educational infrastructure, availability of faculty, of course, financing, and long-term workforce development. So this is why precisely so many organizations now working in Africa have focused so heavily on expanding local surgical training programs rather than just relying on solely on episodic external support. SCORE has helped solve part of this problem by offering World Bank tiered pricing based on purchasing power. So in America, or really top-tier income countries, the typical subscription for a trainee is $215. That's prorated to $9 in the lowest tier to really make it accessible across the world. And that started to pay dividends. So one of the most important accrediting agencies in Africa is called PACS, the Pan-African Academy of Christian Surgeons. They train, they have 200 graduates in 26 African nations and 200 residents a year. And each one of those trainees has an outsized impact on a local population because of the slides I told you before. So yes, the 60-to-1 ratio is a terrible ratio to think about at the face of it, but when you start to impact education in one trainee in Africa, it has a 60-fold impact. So PACS is actually, because of our World Bank tiered pricing, has now signed on to SCORE to deploy this training paradigm across the entire continent. Another example of this global evolution in surgical education is actually hosted right here at Brown. So those slides came from the Parkers. They're a married couple, Andrea and Robert Parker. They're on faculty here at Brown in the Department of Surgery, and they have long sustained and supported a collaboration from Brown to Tenwick Hospital, pictured here in Kenya. It's a rural critical access hospital. What they convinced me a couple of weeks ago, and we've been talking for a couple of months, is that we should no longer think of surgical education as a one-way export of Western educational modules or models. Programs like Tenwick are truly on the cutting edge in innovation in training, autonomy, scaling workforce development, because precisely they are resource limited. So what they can do with limited resources, there are things in there that we can learn from them. And so SCORE is now actively collaborating with the Parkers to deploy an African-specific entire curriculum to support their educational mission. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Surge Hub. This is a UN-funded open access platform similar to SCORE that is broadly for surgical care, but also anesthetic care and obstetric care as well. and they do very good work. So up to this point, I've focused primarily on curriculum and competencies, but another theme I'd like to talk about is the growing ability to use large-scale data and multi-organizational collaboration to study training itself. And I'll briefly mention the first trial here, the flexibility and duty hour requirements for surgical trainees trial. This was conducted in 2016, included 100 surgical training programs, 4,000 trainees, and 140,000 patients. It was a prospective randomized national trial that studied the recently increased stricter duty hour requirements to a relaxed duty hour structure. And the study was important because it showed that there were no worse patient outcomes with the relaxed duty hour structure. And so what this did is finally convince the ACGME with rigorous data to roll back their strictest 2011 duty hour restrictions. And this study represented a shift because GME policy for the first time was no longer just being shaped by opinion, anecdote, or isolated institutional experience, but rather by collaborative national data sets, true rigorous outcomes research, and shared infrastructure across accrediting bodies, specialty organizations, and certifying boards. Another example of collaboration that's come is entrustable professional activities. Hopefully many of you have heard about this. I know it's rolling out across graduate medical education in many specialties. First described in 2005, started to gain traction in the US in 2014 when the AAMC established 13 core EPAs for graduating medical students. The idea here is that rather than simply asking whether a resident possesses isolated competencies, the competencies you see on the back wall there, EPAs attempt to answer, can this trainee be trusted to perform the real work of medicine or surgery safely and independently? So the transition from concept to implementation of EPAs has happened gradually, but I'd argue intentionally. Between 2018 and 19, the American Board of Surgery, which has really been at the forefront of EPAs, instituted a beta trial across 28 training programs, including ours. We found a lot of heterogeneity in the way that EPAs could be implemented. There was a true difference in low resource and high resource. Despite that, there were very positive results, and we continued to build momentum. And in 2023, the American Board of Surgery formally announced that EPA assessment would be a requirement for trainees graduating in 2028. So 2 years from now, those chief residents in our programs will be expected to come to the American Board of Surgery with a portfolio of EPAs that they have accumulated over training. So I'd argue that EPAs represent one of the major evolutions beyond traditional competency-based education. Competencies describe the attributes of a physician. EPAs translate those competencies into the actual work of medicine, the tasks and responsibilities that we entrust physicians to perform. And the landscape now is quite varied. You'll see different levels of establishment, surgery, family medicine, probably most far advanced, EM, anesthesiology, and urology catching up. And this is by no means just a national phenomenon. It's quite international, certainly in Canada and in Australia, and it really started in the Netherlands with Ole Tenkate's work. So there was a second Blue Ribbon Commission. It convened a couple years ago, really to look back and take stock of what had been accomplished from the first Blue Ribbon Commission and to set really a strategic plan for the House of Surgery going forward. This commission reinforced many of the same themes and pushed the field even further towards outcomes-driven competency assessment. One of the central themes, and I put the slide up in probably every talk I give, is that competency-based assessment should become embedded within the daily clinical workflow and be correlated with patient outcomes rather than existing solely as isolated educational exercise. I'd argue that in many ways, this represents the next phase of medical education. Not simply creating competencies or EPAs, but developing integrated systems that can capture meaningful performance data in real clinical environments. So all of our clinicians in the room, we center around patient care. We've talked a lot about curriculum and standards, but now I'd like to pivot a little bit to the future. And I think the key aspect of education that is ripe for disruption now is assessment. And more importantly, linking assessment to both patient care and curriculum. Some of you may remember about 5 years ago, the Coalition for Physician Accountability, a large multidisciplinary group, made recommendations on the UME to GME transition. Still a transition that is not particularly well ironed out, and the need for shared competency frameworks, standardized assessment language, and faculty development focused on direct observation and real clinical evaluation. we are still in a phase where the graduating medical student comes with a portfolio that is largely unreadable by GME. And we still have a system where GME sends data back to UME that is largely unreadable. It's like a floppy disk with a USB. They just don't communicate very well. And so what we've really tried to do is figure out and make systems so that a learner, we can figure out when a learner is ready for progressive responsibility and ultimately, of course, independent practice. That's the goal of education. Critically, that assessment needs to happen at the bedside, in clinics, in consults, in the operating room, not just in conference rooms or simulation labs, or even worse, in a vague, fuzzy, end of rotation evaluation. Good resident, read more, right? That's a classic evaluation that people still get. So this mandate has created growing interest in tools and platforms capable of capturing workplace-based assessment in real time. Yes, I'm a part-time employee of the American Board of Surgery. I should have said that as a disclosure, but I think we are really at the cutting edge of all of this work. The American Board of Surgery commissioned a group out of the University of Michigan, Brian George and his team, to build its EPA platform. And so most training programs have been using this platform for the last 2 years to meet that requirement in 2028 for our portfolio of EPAs. But I've really become interested in a group out of Oregon Health Sciences University. This is led by Ruchi Tanawala, who's a thoracic surgeon, and her PhD husband. I've highlighted a lot of high-powered couples here. So they're a high-powered couple. He's a PhD informatician and data scientist, and they pioneered this platform called Firefly, which is gaining rapid traction across the country. What's amazing is that Firefly is in, as you can see, 250 hospitals, 35 specialties. They've accumulated 2 million cases and have developed hundreds of thousands of learning curves. What's amazing about Firefly is that it gathers enormous amounts of assessment and clinical performance data across institutions, specialties, and training environments. So this is a Firefly assessment on the left. This is what I use now after every case. Thursday was my OR day. I did 5 of these. I think this is for a lap chole. You'll see it's, hopefully you're recognizing the EPA framework here. It's individual parts of this lap chole. It's not just how did they treat gallbladder disease or how did they do in this operation. It is how did they put the port in? How did they dissect Callow's triad? How did they extract the gallbladder? And at the end of the case, you give an entrustment score. I should mention that microassessments are designed to be high volume, low stakes. So one lousy EPA doesn't sink your career because you're hopefully accumulating thousands of these EPAs over time. This is very much in my mind a move towards precision medical education. So the idea that training itself may eventually become more adaptive, predictive, and personalized. So this is very much personalized both to the assessor and the learner, and very much informed by large-scale longitudinal data. Oh, I meant to talk about the learning curves for a sec. So with the thousands of data points that come in, each resident can be benchmarked within a program that's on the top and nationally. So you can sit down with your trainee, for example, and say, okay, you stink, but this is why you stink. It's because you can't do this part of a case. Sorry, I should be more supportive. You're wonderful. This is why you're wonderful. It's because you're ahead of the curve in this or you're ahead of the curve in that. But you really can provide actionable feedback as opposed to just saying, yeah, I don't know, I think you need another year of training or you're fine. You know, it's much more targeted to the individual trainee and the training environment. It gets better. So what's most exciting about Firefly is that they finally cracked the code, and it's legal, by the way, there's nothing illegal about this, to integrate our electronic medical records, whether you use Cerner or Epic, into Firefly. So we are actively working on this API at Cooper so that it will pre-populate. The Epic already knows that I'm doing the case. It knows who my resident is because they're already logged into the system. And so at the end of the case, as the nurse hits close on the chart, it sends me an evaluation, it sends the trainee a self-evaluation, and it's all linked in. It automatically populates the procedure code. So suddenly, you're no longer duplicating information. This information is already in your data stream. And then we at SCORE are working with Firefly to then take the Firefly evaluation and deliver customized content to the trainee. So the evaluation might have said, you didn't understand how to do this part of the case, you could use some improvement. Okay, we will send you one of those videos that I showed you, maybe earmarked or bookmarked to the exact part that they need to learn how to do. And so now we have this really virtuous cycle of integrating patient care, assessment, and curriculum to improve training, and I'd argue to improve patient care down the line. You'll recognize maybe at the top, this is what a UPS or FedEx map looks like. So I'd argue that competency-based medical education, and we're not there yet, but one of its most provocative implications has been the possibility that training duration itself might become individualized. So think of the trainee who needs the extra year of training, or on the opposite, the trainee who's just flying cruise control at the end of their training program. So these modern assessment systems allow us to be much more adaptive. And to use the UPS FedEx analogy, they have they've figured out how to optimize delivery networks. Their goal, of course, is identical for every package: arrive safely, accurately, and on time. But the route taken might be very different and may not be intuitive, but they're taking into account this stoplight is this right turn is better than that left turn. So we are not that far away from doing that. By using those learning curves, the curve on the bottom comes from Firefly. They can actually use your learning evaluations, your training evaluations, to say, all right, this is how you did in this case. Your next best case to optimize your learning might be this case with this surgeon, because they can really optimize your training. So this doesn't mean we're cutting corners, we're not necessarily shortening training time, but we're optimizing it. We're trying to make the time as valuable as possible. We have some pilots in pathology and general surgery that are trying to actually do that now. So we have a pilot at Cooper where in the last 6 months of your surgical residency, you can be actually credentialed as an independent faculty member. You're still very much in the nest, in the learning. You're in room 8, and maybe I'm in room 9. So it's a very safe environment where you can take care of patients independently. But this, I think, is the eventual goal of precision competency-based training. So I think we've come a long way. If you recognize the Rosetta Stone, UME to GME to continuing medical education, I think if we can get this all figured out, the integrating data streams, the communication back and forth, we really will have evolved from a series of isolated checkpoints into a truly longitudinal and integrated developmental model, one that continuously informs learning, adapts to individual needs, and links educational processes directly to the outcomes we care about most: safer systems, better physicians, and better care for patients. This is where we graduated. I'm truly grateful for the education and experience I received here at Brown over 8 years. I am 100% certain it prepared me and laid the foundation for a career devoted to improving graduate medical education. Thank you again for the honor of this lectureship. Now, my classmates told me they had some hard Q&A sessions lined up for me, so go for it. Take your best shot. Nadine.
Where do I begin? And I think it's Nadine. Really, actually, thank you for dedicating your career to education. Just want to say thank you. Because when I need surgery, I know who I'll call. There's so many questions I want to ask you right now, but the one that's going to boil up to the top is you're investing, and your organization your entity is investing a lot of thought into maintaining the value of the physician, specifically the surgical physician. Some of us on this row are primary care and other specialties. But is there a come to whatever, fill in the blank deity moment going on behind the scenes where there's a recognition of the devaluing of the physician and the extent of which we educate and invest in our education, our teachers invested, and you can't replicate that as a nurse practitioner or PA, yet the finances and no offense to those who worked in the insurance industry in the room, the insurance industry is putting more and more pressure to churn out volume, and as a result going to far less expensive physician equivalents, but we've all become providers. So I wanted to know, in the educational realm, what is going on to make sure that we're still of value?
It's a great question. And I actually have an answer, or it's an opinion. I'm big surprise, I have an opinion. I think, and I think it's a credit to the education we all had. And again, a credit to the first slide I put up, which is the goal of the PLME, is a broad-based education. So my answer to your question, in my opinion, is we need physicians leading these organizations, because when physicians lead organizations, they organize these organizations to deliver the best healthcare. And I say that from a very personal example here, because where I work now, which is Cooper in New Jersey, we are led from the top to the bottom with physicians, and I feel it in every single decision that is made in the healthcare network. I've never worked at a hospital that was led by physicians. Of course, our medical schools are led by physicians, but the hospital to be led by a physician makes all the difference in the world. And I look around the room and I see physicians, we all trained together or educated together. And some of us have gone into non-clinical tracks, into leadership of these other organizations. So I think when we can put physicians in leadership positions, it makes a huge difference. But we then have to empower those physicians in training, wherever it is, in undergrad, in graduate medical education, maybe with additional degrees, to then have the resources to lead those organizations effectively.
As a former vice chair of another American board besides surgery, I just wanted to thank you for a great talk that talks about and makes clear the role of our American boards, our certifying boards, in education and in furthering education and in making it more rigorous in terms of deciding who needs to learn what and when. And especially, this is really exciting to know that we're evolving a track that says you can finish early, you can finish late. That's really a huge advance in surgery. I also want to express my concern, and as being a member of the first class of this institution, our medical knowledge was rated at approximately 2 on your exponential curve of medical knowledge, and we really studied harder than that. I also want to say, because there'll be a problem tomorrow with the weather, and I almost always, for the last 20 years, I've been greeting the graduating class in the commencement line as they form up. If you please see new graduates this year, please convey the best wishes of the first class. I've been doing that for 20 years and making sure they do well. So please congratulate them.
Dr. Joshi, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for this lecture. My name is Lola Brown. I work at Wake Forest School of Medicine Advocate Health as the Senior Vice President for Strategy. One of the things that really interested me is this idea of precision medical education, right? Different than precision medicine that we know very, very commonly, right? So my question is, can you speak a little bit more about that in relation to the focus on more of the practical training versus the didactic learning? Are they for both, or, just trying to get a little better sense of how that could play out now and in the future?
Yeah,
Thanks.
so I think the key there, thank you for your question, is the curricular assets that we bring are not just book knowledge. You need that, of course. And if you think about the way our American Board of Surgery exams are, the first exam is book knowledge. Do you understand how to take care of these patients? The treatment algorithm is all that. The second exam is all about judgment and how you would actually take care of a patient. It's simulated, of course, but how you would do that. But what we've tried to do, and those other curricula have done the same thing, is to really expand the portfolio of educational assets beyond just the book or the bulleted content. It is lectures delivered across the country so that maybe you don't have a liver surgeon in your program. Well, you have the benefit of a liver surgeon here. You just sort of plug and play that lecture into your program. All those images, those multimedia assets, we have three-dimensional models you can sort of spin around. So, understanding the lobar anatomy of the lung is not easy. You really have to think about three-dimensionally. And it's only going to get better. I mean, think about the advances of AI for even in our daily usage between now and even 6 months ago. So we are absolutely harnessing all of that as we continue to develop the curriculum. And the key, I think, about that the important slide of the interconnected world is they're starting to meld together. So it used to be you would read, you would operate, you would get assessed. But now they're really starting to, first of all, be very much more interconnected, but maybe you're actually learning while you're being assessed because it's live. There's a neat system, for example. We're always giving feedback. I give a lot of feedback in the OR. And if you had an ambient microphone picking that up and then use a large language model to actually process that, you don't have to do anything. I already gave you the feedback during the case. So why then go and have to fill it in? So technology, we don't want to be over-reliant on technology, but we'd be fools to ignore the power of technology to make this better.
I got microphones. Hi, Paul Patel, and that was a really good talk. But I'm wondering, I am a pediatric hematologist oncologist. The procedure part of this is easily you can immediately see how you could train in people to do lumbar punctures and interthing. It's the other stuff which is so much. It seems to me so much harder to quantitate and ask those precise questions. How are you going to address that? And the other thing is I was fortunate. I did all my training here. So I was able to get out of being a pediatric resident after 2 years and become a pediatric hematology oncology fellow. I did as best. I've thought about it a lot. I didn't miss out on anything by cutting out that year because I was never going to give a kid another vaccination. It never happened. All kinds of other things I would have spent my time doing, which I never spent, I never again did. And one of the things that I think could come from this kind of effort is say, if you're going to go into some niche, be it surgical or pediatric or whatever, is there a way to shorten your training time so you really are spending your time on what you're going to actually do?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, every board, every training, every specialty is thinking about how to shorten training. You will know that the pediatric fellowships just decided that they are giving the option now to cut out a year of the research year because they're like surgery was in 2001. They're on the cliff's edge because no one's going to pediatrics anymore, and even if you were going to the fellowship. So I am confident that that is all coming in. We'll be informed by data. That's the key. It's not just on a whim that we're doing that. It's informed by data.
Me? Okay.
You have the microphone. It's the power of the mic.
Okay, thank you. So I'm a grad from 1987 from med school, and I did my residency at the Brigham, and I was there for 8 years, and I was here for 25. I'm an anesthesiologist, and I'm very interested in this, daily feedback on the actual case that you're working on with your attending. I have a couple questions about that. Like, how quickly do you give them the feedback like right there the same day? Because the cases go so quickly. Like right at the end of the case, you give them the feedback and like you sit down and talk about it?
I dictate the case and then I'd fill in the Firefly app. And then they get it by the time they finish closing.
But you talk to them about your feelings?
Well, I've been talking to them the whole case. So
okay.
So this measures it for posterity. You're right. Eventually it should be an ambient microphone. We're actually thinking about doing that. It just gathers it as we're going. To your point, and there was a similar question about, you said non-procedural, but even for, we're trialing it, we're doing it in anesthesia at Cooper. So we have intubation, we have A-line, we have, and then for the non-procedural specialties, and even procedural specialties, because we still need to do that, we have EPAs for presentations, for consultations, for how to get consents. These are all important things that we have to measure over time.
Absolutely. And so for anesthesia, like at the end of our case and beginning of the next case, we don't have any like downtime. We're running to get the next thing set up. So
I see you guys. You check your Forbes account. You're checking the Wall Street Journal. There's time.
So when would I give my feedback to my resident? Like at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's right. You do it at the end of the case or, while you're starting the next case.
Okay. And the last question I have is like, so you're coming into an OR as a resident and there's a lot of anxiety just being in the OR. And now you've got this in the back of your head. Every movement I make is going to be analyzed.
The key, though, is that it's.
How do you deal with it emotionally? Is what I'm asking.
So it's, Shilpa. It's because it's low stakes. That is the key. It's low stakes. Think about the way you engage with your family. We give lots of feedback to our family members all the time, right? Layla Vikram, you can attest to that. And so it's actually, well, in my case, of course, it's high stakes, but you probably interpret it as low stakes. So you get thousands and thousands of low stakes data points every day for corrective action. So it should be no different than that because no one's making a final decision based on one microassessment. It's the cluster of microassessments that then allows you to make that decision. Shobha.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi.
Thank you, Dr. Pai.
So I work more in the space of UME education, and we started putting in more precision medical education. And we have a new facility built, and we're building in AI models to kind of do that evaluation piece. Can you speak a little bit more about how this Firefly model can be adapted in the UME space?
There's no question it can be adapted, and we're probably going to do that at Cooper. The key is designing the right instrument. So what are you going to ask, and how are you going to, it's so easy. I can literally do it with you over a Zoom. You pick a competency, whatever it is. Maybe it's physical examination. How do you do an abdominal examination on a cirrhotic? Let's use that one. You look for this, you look for that, you look for that. How do you administer a vaccination? That's something a medical student would very much do. You prep the patient, you do this, you do that. I don't really know the steps, obviously. And you would assess them on that. So the key is, I would say, what I tell my program directors, pick 3 to 5 things that you do regularly, intubation, A-line, whatever, and then start to assess them and start to generate tens and tens of these every day if you can.
And just a follow-up question. So one of the roles I work in is health equity, and we trying to assess that. So on one of the more softer skills, can that be built in?
Absolutely.
To Firefly?
I'll use the example of how do you give a consent, or how do you do a sign out, end of shift? How do you console a patient with a big decision? It has to be observed, that's for sure. And then you design the instrument and you assess it. It's definitely doable. Dr. Harrington.
Fantastic. It's so nice to see you first.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Amazing. I have a granular question. I got the sense that when you were showing us the process live of the Firefly rating system, that, if I'm not mistaken, that you were also discussing your own rating, not just the residents. Was there also a rating of an attending, or was it you rating the resident?
I am rating the resident. There are actually, you could flip it on its head. So there are really good initiatives where the resident rates the attending on their teaching skills or maybe their professionalism. Wow. It's doable too. Yeah, absolutely. There's a question in the back first.
Thank you very much for your talk. I'm curious, as we get better at these micro assessments, high volume, low risk, is there any thought to moving away from the 100-plus-year-old multiple choice test as ultimate assessment?
You're talking
as
like
internal medicine,
MCQ tests?
Internal medicine, I can train 13 trainees and do hundreds of these assessments, and yet the stamp of quality is how they do on their board exam.
Yeah, good question. This is a question for really the boards to individually decide, right? It's hard for me to say for every board. I think if we really got assessment right, we wouldn't need a summative assessment. We would have enough formative assessment that we could draw a conclusion. I'll use my kids as an example again. Vikram, when he was 4, maybe 3, could he take a shower? I don't know. Maybe he could take a shower, but we never administered him a test to say Vikram can independently take a shower. We just observed enough low stakes things to say, all right, he can take a shower, right? It's not actually, I know I'm using a flippant example, but it's not actually that different. If I do enough lap choles with my trainee and I transmit that information to the board, why couldn't the board say, sure, this trainee can be entrusted to do a lap chole? So I think eventually if we do it well enough, it's a possibility. Am I getting the hook? Yeah. Okay. Okay, last question. Ronnie.
Thanks. So I think my question is actually more a thought experiment than anything, but through medical school, through residency, through all these experiences, there's definitely the boot camp mentality of you're in a group doing things together. And I see a lot of value in this personalization, but how much will that isolate or individuate rather than allowing for some of this group grit? And I mean, there's always you're sharing call and you're doing things, but how do we make that all fit together?
I completely agree with you. I think the participating in life as a social experiment is one of the most important things that I have discovered is important. And when we degrade that, I think that is actually the source of things there are many causes, but that's the source of people getting disillusioned, people burning out. None of this takes away from that, though. You're still, and the key is that it's bedside. It's within, what's the word I use? It's integrated into the acts of patient care. So you're not actually affecting any of that. You're right. Someone else made the comment well, are you talking verbally? We are. I mean, we're giving the feedback continuously. We're just recording it through this to try to develop a data set over time. But I think you're right. Nothing beats, for me still, I was talking to Dr. Ayala and I said, do you still come to work every day? He said, yeah, I come to work every day. It's part of the social fun of making science and having a fulfilling career. So I can't I think you're right to emphasize how important that is.
Maybe we'll get some.
Thank you.